Hit that subscribe button on Crime Uncovered to stay with us as the net tightens around the person who held the map to her life. We tell this story to honor Nancy's memory, not to sensationalize the tragedy that ended it. No rumors, no theories, just the cold facts and official police reports. Smash the like button if you agree that the silence between 9:50 p.m. and 1:47 a.m. is the smoking gun. Drop a comment below. What is the killer hiding in those 238 minutes? The clock doesn't lie. 41 minutes of terror. The electronic evidence draws a map of precision that is impossible to ignore. Someone knew her world. Someone drafted a plan based on intimacy. Someone checked their watch and struck with a timing only a friend could know. It has been 30 days since the sirens faded. Every lab result is pointing us toward the one person with access. Because we already know the mechanics of the murder. The crime scene screams the method, but the timeline betrays the man. This wasn't just violence. It was knowledge weaponized. And the knock on the door is coming. 9:50 p.m. The garage door grinds shut. Pause for a second. Close your eyes and visualize it. A silent street winding through the Catalina Foothills. Houses tucked far back from the curb. Ancient trees throwing long, ink-black shadows under the street lamps. Immaculate lawns. It is the sort of zip code where everyone knows your name, where danger feels like a foreign concept. 9:50 on a Saturday night in January. Windows glow with warm light. Televisions flicker against the blinds. Families are collapsing onto couches, letting the weekend wash over them. Boring. Safe. Routine. You hear the mechanical whine of the garage motor. Then, the solid thud of rubber hitting concrete. It is the most ordinary sound in suburbia. But inside one of those stucco homes sits an 84-year-old grandmother. Secure, deadbolts thrown, lamps dimmed, the house breathing in its slow nighttime rhythm. Outside, an engine revs. Red taillights bleed into the darkness as they pull away. The dinner guests are leaving. The card games are over. Just another Saturday. Nancy Guthrie is alone now. A solitude she has known for 1,000 nights before this one. This is her baseline. This is normal. The quiet independence of a widow ruling a home she has held for decades. But tonight, the safety is a lie. Tonight, the pattern is about to shatter. Fast forward to 1:47 a.m., 3 hours and 57 minutes of silence. Then, a motion sensor trips in the dark, a shape materializes. A black mask erases his face. Only the eyes burn through narrow slits. Gloved hands, a tactical pack tight against his spine. There is a pistol on his hip. He is not sprinting. He is not panicked. He walks with the terrifying calm of a man who owns the place. Look at his kit. He did not just stumble onto this porch hoping for an open window. A 25-liter assault pack chosen for capacity. Heavy-duty mechanics, gloves to kill fingerprints, a full face mask, a holstered weapon, ready to draw. This is not impulse. This is not a crime of opportunity. This is a man who made a shopping list for violence. His hand reaches for the lens, and at exactly 1:47 a.m., the feed dies. 44 seconds, that is all the evidence we have before the world went black. By sunrise, Nancy Guthrie had vanished. Only blood remained on the stones. Her pacemaker sent its final signal at 2:28 a.m. 41 minutes. That is the window between the intruder arriving and her heart stopping. Evidence of a plan. Evidence so damning that Sheriff Chris Nanos broke protocol within 24 hours, a move you almost never see in missing persons cases. He bypassed search and rescue. He dialed homicide. Murder detectives took the lead because seasoned investigators looked at that timeline and they knew the story it told. And that story was not about a random break-in. It was about intelligence, about surveillance, about a predator who studied Nancy Guthrie's life until he knew the exact minute she was defenseless. 30 days later, one question haunts this investigation. Who knew? Who had the patience to watch the family leave and wait exactly 3 hours and 57 minutes before striking? Who possessed the intel to execute an operation this surgical? We are not here to name a suspect today. The investigation is active. The labs are still running DNA sequences. No handcuffs have been slapped on yet, but this video is about the math. It is about forensic analysis of those 238 minutes of waiting. It is about profiling the mind that held the keys to this house before he even stepped inside. Before we tear apart the layers of surveillance required for this crime, hit that subscribe button on Crime Uncovered, toggle the bell. We decode the clocks. We track the forensic patterns. We follow the facts into the dark. If you believe that gap between 950 and 1:47 proves a calculated hit, smash the like button and drop a comment. What does that silence tell you? That gap is the skeleton key to this entire case. First, we have to understand the target. Nancy Ellen Long Guthrie entered this world on January 27th, 1942 in Fort Wright, Kentucky. 84 years old. Let that sink in. 84 years of breathing, 84 years of memories, relationships, and history. A lifetime of being a daughter, a wife, a mother. She planted her roots in the Arizona desert back in the early 70s, more than 50 years ago. Half a century building a legacy in the Catalina Foothills, 50 years of being a neighbor, 50 years of being known. She raised 3 children here. Annie Guthrie, her eldest, the author of The Good Dark, published in 2015, a jeweler, a former director at the University of Arizona Poetry Center. She stayed close, living nearby with her husband, Tommaso. But then there is Savannah Guthrie, the co-anchor of NBC's Today Show, one of the most famous faces in American morning television, broadcasting to millions every single day. That level of fame implies wealth, it implies access, and it puts a target on your back. Cameron Guthrie, Nancy's boy, a retired Air Force colonel who spent 26 years strapped into the cockpit of an F-16. But stripped of the rank and the medals, Nancy was simply grandma. A matriarch to kids who, if you believe the public record, didn't just love her. They worshiped her. The kind of grandmother you swarm at family parties, the one constant heartbeat throughout their entire growing up years. Sheriff Chris Nanos was surgical about her mental state. Sharp as a tack, zero cognitive drift, and you have to understand why that matters. Her mind was a fortress. Memory clear, awareness total. Which means Nancy wasn't confused when the situation turned. She processed every second of it with absolute clarity. But while her mind was steel, her body was betraying her. Movement was a battle. She had a pacemaker, keeping the rhythm in her chest, ticking away the time she couldn't run from. She survived on a strict cocktail of daily meds. Sheriff Nanos didn't sugarcoat it, skip a dose, and you're flirting with death. Listen to the dispatch tapes from the initial call, and it hits you. Nancy couldn't make it 50 yards without a helping hand. Those physical limits sealed her fate. She couldn't run. She couldn't hide. She couldn't fight back. And she was alone. Solitary in that Catalina Foothills residence. No dog to bark, a warning. No roommate to hear a scream. Just a devoted regular at St. Andrew's Presbyterian. They've whispered her name in prayer every Sunday since she vanished. A congregation pleading for a miracle. She'd been walking this path alone since 1988. Her husband, Charles, taken at 49, a mining expedition in Mexico that he never came home from. That is 38 years of solo survival, 4 decades of rigid routines built to keep her world spinning. Quiet, stable, anchored by family and faith. She was the picture of resilience right up until the sun went down on Saturday, January 31st, 2026. That evening started with false safety. Dinner at her daughter Annie's place, just a stone's throw from Nancy's sanctuary. It was the standard American weekend ritual. Plates clinking, cards shuffling, voices rising and falling, the comfortable, hypnotic rhythm of a family at rest. Annie, her husband Tommaso, their son. Nancy soaking in the mundane, beautiful moments that anchor a life. Then came 9:48 p.m. The digital timestamp tells the story. Tommaso Chione drives Nancy back to her door. Tommaso, the son-in-law, married to Nancy's oldest girl since 2006. Father to her grandson, an Italian-born biology teacher shaping minds at Basis Oro Valley. He'd been part of the tribe for 20 years. He took the wheel that night for the short, familiar run to Nancy's house. A drive he could do in his sleep. Routine, normal, just family looking out for family. He pulled into the driveway at 9:48. But he didn't just idle at the curb and wave goodbye. Sheriff Nanos told the New York Times, the specific details. Tommaso walked her up the path, watched her cross the threshold. He waited until the lock clicked. That's the protocol when you're responsible for an 84-year-old with bad legs. Nancy went inside. Tommaso confirmed she was safe. 2 minutes later, 9:50 p.m. The timeline snapped shut. The garage door went down. Tommaso drove back to his wife and son. And just like that, he became the last familiar face Nancy Guthrie would ever see. Now, stop and look at the clock, because this timeline is the oxygen line for the entire investigation. Tommaso Tioni was the last checkpoint, the last confirmation of life before the silence set in. He was the last human contact. And when the investigation hit the 2-week mark, the online whispers started turning into a roar. The internet sleuths started hunting for a villain. The pressure on the cops was crushing. So on February 16th, Sheriff Nanos stepped up to the mic and dropped a hammer. The Guthrie family, he said, siblings, spouses, everyone is clear. Not a quiet internal memo, a public declaration. Definitive, loud, absolute. He repeated it to make sure it stuck. The Guthrie family is out of the suspect pool. He was clearing Tommaso without speaking his name, clearing the spouses, clearing the man who saw her last. And then the sheriff went for the throat. He called the family gracious, he called them victims, and he said pointing the finger at them wasn't just wrong, it was cruel. That is strong language for a badge. Why the emotion? Why the force? Because the timestamps don't lie. Look at the gap. 9:50 p.m. Tommaso leaves. 1:47 a.m. The masked phantom appears. That is a void of 3 hours and 57 minutes. Where was Tommaso during that 3-hour blackout? Safe at home with Annie. His digital ghost anchored him miles away from the tragedy. Digital footprints are the ultimate witness. They create alibis that simply cannot be faked. So, where was Annie? Where were Savannah and Cameron? Their locations were pinned, verified, and locked into the digital cloud that tracks our every move. The family wasn't there. They couldn't have been. The timeline clears them with absolute certainty, but that clearance uncovers a much darker reality. It comes down to intimacy. Tommaso had spent 20 years visiting that house. He knew the floor plan by heart. He knew the routines, the patterns, the weak spots. He held the kind of insider knowledge this crime required. But he wasn't the one in the mask. The clock proves it. His alibi is solid. The evidence clears him, which leads to a terrifying conclusion. Someone else held that same blueprint. Someone else had walked those halls enough to learn the rhythm of the house without raising a single red flag. That is what Tommaso's innocence reveals. It proves the killer possessed family-level knowledge while standing outside the circle. A stranger knew Nancy's life well enough to strike with the precision of a ghost. This entire case is a study in access. It asks who had the legitimate presence to learn the secrets usually reserved for blood relatives. 9:48 p.m. Tommaso drops Nancy off. He watches until she's safely inside. He drives away knowing she's secure. 3 hours and 57 minutes later, a stranger steps out of the dark. Someone with knowledge they shouldn't have had appears at her door. That is the haunting question here. Who knew what only the family should know? Let's break down those 3 hours and 57 minutes. Nancy is inside, safe, door bolted. She goes through her evening ritual. When you get older, routine isn't just a habit, it's a necessity. So she likely did exactly what she did every other night. The same prep for bed, the same lock check, the same quiet habits, then the gap. 3 hours, 57 minutes. From the garage door humming shut to the nightmare beginning. Stop. Before we go further, look at that silence. Forget the intruder for a second. Forget the gear and the gun. Forget the 41 minutes of terror. Just look at the clock. 9:50 p.m. The house goes quiet. 1:47 a.m. The camera wakes up. A masked figure appears. The math is cold. 3 hours, 57 minutes. 238 minutes of nothing. Ask any detective what that timeline screams. Random crime is messy and fast. Opportunists hate time. Time is exposure. Exposure is risk. Every second you linger is another chance for a car to drive by, another chance for a neighbor to glance out a window, another chance for a patrol car to turn the corner. Pros know this instinctively. You get in, you get out. We are talking minutes, not hours. Impulsive criminals don't have the luxury of patience. They see a window and they take it before it closes. But this shadow, they waited 238 minutes, nearly 4 hours. Why wait that long? What does that patience tell you about their plan? Look at the specific timing, 10 p.m., 1 hour after the family leaves. Nancy might still be up, moving around, alert enough to scream. 11 p.m., 2 hours in. She might be in bed, but it's light sleep, easy to wake. Midnight, 3 hours. She's asleep, but maybe not deep enough. But 1:47 a.m., nearly 2 in the morning, 4 hours of silence. That timing suggests a predator who knew exactly when the target was most vulnerable. They knew when the house would be dead quiet and when her ability to respond was at absolute zero. The timeline proves calculation. It proves they knew the patterns. You don't guess a window like that. You don't wait 4 hours in the dark unless you know exactly when the lights go out for good. The silence in the logbook wasn't an accident, it was a schedule. Sheriff Chris Nanos scanned the data less than 24 hours after the missing persons report was filed for Nancy. His eyes locked on a specific void in the record, a gap lasting exactly 3 hours and 57 minutes. He didn't hesitate. He saw the implication and made a split-second executive decision that law enforcement rarely touches during the first 24 hours. He picked up the phone and dialed homicide. Not search and rescue, not the missing persons unit, homicide. He escalated this to a murder investigation a full day before most departments would even finish filing the initial paperwork. That choice is the tell. It confirms the timeline revealed a dark truth. This wasn't a senior citizen who got confused and wandered off. She didn't walk away. She didn't trip and fall. This wasn't a medical episode. The gaps were too precise, too calculated. Someone knew exactly when to strike. Now, cut to 1:47 a.m. Sunday, February 1st, 2026. The Google Nest camera at the front door flickers to life. The motion sensors trip. The Wi-Fi grabs the signal. A figure steps into the frame, male, standing between 5'9" and 5'10". The FBI nailed that height down later, using an osteometric board right there on the porch to measure the geometry of the shot. They used the architecture itself as a ruler. The suspect is average height, average build, physically generic in a way that makes him a ghost dressed for the void. Black shirt, black pants, black shoes. Every thread chosen to disappear into the night. A ski mask swallows his face. Just crude holes sliced out for the eyes. No skin visible. Just a narrow, cold stare peering through the fabric. Heavy-duty gloves wrap his hands. No fingerprints left behind. On his back, a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack. That logo is the first crack in his armor. Ozark Trail is a private label. It is sold exclusively at Walmart. You can't buy it anywhere else. That restricts the supply chain. Every single one of those packs sold in the United States runs through a Walmart register. Every sale leaves a digital footprint. Sheriff Nanos confirmed they are already mining Walmart's database, hunting for that specific backpack purchase. They are cross-referencing receipts and timestamps, and then there is the other detail, a gun clearly holstered at his hip in the footage. He strapped on a firearm to visit an 84-year-old woman who barely moved. She wasn't a threat. That weapon isn't for protection. It's a statement of intent. It proves he walked up those steps ready to kill. Look at his body language in the clip. He isn't sprinting. He isn't checking over his shoulder. He is walking with a steady, rhythmic gait, purposeful, direct. He moves like a man who has rehearsed this. Behavioral analysts call this predatory comfort, the lack of jitters, the absolute control. Strangers don't move like that in a dark, unfamiliar house. That is the walk of someone who knows the floor plan. He reaches up, and at exactly 1:47 a.m., the system dies. The recording cuts. The lens goes black. the live feed is severed. We only have those 44 seconds because Google Nest automatically pushes footage to the cloud in real time. Even after he killed the camera, those 44 seconds were already safe on a server miles away. FBI Director Kash Patel later revealed they had to dig deep into the back-end trash data to salvage the clip. It wasn't easy. There was no active subscription to save the file, so the feds worked directly with Google engineers to scrape the residual cache and rebuild the scene. That digital forensics miracle is the only reason we know what the monster at the door looked like. But here is the chilling part. The camera was blind, but the motion sensor was still alive. 25 minutes later at 2:12 a.m., the sensor trips again. No picture, just a data point in the log. Movement in the dark. He didn't leave. He was still there. 25 minutes after breaking in. Then silence for 16 more minutes until 2:28 a.m. Nancy's pacemaker severs its connection with her iPhone. The app had been shaking hands with her heart monitor, constantly syncing rhythm, checking status. At 2:28 a.m., that handshake failed. Medical transmitters don't just quit for no reason. Maybe the distance became too great. Maybe signal interference kicked in. Maybe the device broke. Or maybe something catastrophic happened to the body holding the device. The math creates a horrifying window. 1:47 a.m., the camera dies. 2:12 a.m., movement in the hall. 2:28 a.m., the heart monitor goes dark. 1:47 to 2:28, 41 minutes. Say it out loud, 41 minutes. That is longer than a standard sitcom, longer than your commute. That is an eternity to be inside a stranger's house. Burglars want to be in and out in 5 minutes. Speed is safety. Staying for 41 minutes isn't theft. It's something else entirely. The digital timestamps tell a chilling story. Someone was inside that house with her for at least 41 minutes. Let the weight of that number sink in. That isn't the frantic smash and grab of a panicked intruder. That is the calm, deliberate pace of someone who feels right at home. Imagine breaking into a stranger's house in the dead of night. Every shadow looks like a threat, and you freeze at every creaking floorboard. Now flip the script. Imagine walking through a room you know by heart, moving efficiently because you know exactly where the furniture sits. 41 minutes points to that second scenario. It screams familiarity. The alarm bells started ringing Sunday morning when Nancy didn't log on for her virtual church service. Family rushed to the house and found the nightmare waiting on the front porch, bloodstains that were later confirmed to be hers. But Nancy was gone. They dialed 911, launching a massive investigation that is now dragged on for 30 agonizing days. We need to profile the mind behind this. What exactly did they need to know to pull this off so seamlessly? Let's strip it down to the basics. They needed to know Nancy existed, where she lived, that she was 84, and that she was all alone. Sure, property records are public, and anyone in the neighborhood could tell you who lived there. Delivery drivers and local workers pick up on these things, and the family's fame makes the connection easy to find. But there is a massive gap between knowing someone exists and knowing exactly when they are helpless. The timeline reveals a predator who knew the precise window of vulnerability right after the family left at 9:50 p.m. They knew she would be isolated until the next morning. How do you get that kind of intel? You have to watch. You study the comings and goings, memorizing the rhythm of the household. You learn through repetition that once the dinner guests leave, the lights go out, and she is on her own. That level of pattern recognition requires eyes on the target, someone with a legitimate reason to be lingering nearby. But the intelligence gathering went far deeper than just a daily schedule. The weekend of January 31st into February 1st wasn't chosen at random. That was the exact moment Savannah Guthrie was jetting off to Milan to cover the 2026 Winter Olympics for NBC. Being halfway across the world meant Savannah was thousands of miles from helping in a crisis. So how does the attacker know about Savannah's Olympic itinerary? We aren't talking about general news. We are talking about the specific departure date and the exact timing. NBC doesn't blast their anchors' travel logistics to the public. Savannah didn't post a boarding now selfie on January 31st. That is inner circle information shared with family, close friends, or colleagues, or perhaps shared with a service worker who needed to know, we won't be around this weekend. The timing proves the perpetrator knew this specific weekend offered the perfect storm. They also knew they had to deal with the Google Nest camera watching the front door. They identified the tech, understood the risk, and knew how to bypass it. How do you spot a specific doorbell camera? You don't see that driving by at 30 miles an hour. You have to be close enough to inspect the hardware. You're a delivery driver dropping a package right at the lens. You're a contractor walking in to fix something. You're a friend coming over for a visit. Anyone who walked up that path legitimately would have mapped out the surveillance. They also understood Nancy's physical limitations. They knew she couldn't run, couldn't fight back, and needed help just to move around. How do you build that profile? You watch her move. You see her struggle with the stairs, watch her navigate the hallway, and note the frailty that comes with age. That requires being in the room with her, standing close enough to see exactly what she was capable of. Finally, they knew the house well enough to spend 41 minutes inside without raising an alarm. They knew the layout, the corners, and how to navigate the space in the dark. That kind of confidence suggests they hadn't just broken in, they had been invited inside before. Who knows the rhythm of your life better than your own blood relations? Picture it. Last summer, a Tuesday afternoon, the AC unit dies, it is Arizona, and the heat is rising. It is suffocating. She dials the same HVAC company she has trusted for a decade. The truck pulls up. It is a standard work order, a uniform. He introduces himself, and Nancy lets him in without a second thought. It is routine. He needs the thermostat. She guides him through the sanctuary of her home, past the living room, down the hall, through the kitchen. He is logging the floor plan, memorizing the layout, spotting the entry points. He asks about the basement unit. Nancy mentions her bad knees, says she cannot manage the stairs. He descends alone. He spends 2 hours down there. Total, unsupervised access to the foundation of her home. He fixes the part. She writes a check. He drives away. Just another job. Except now, a stranger holds the blueprint to her life. He knows the geography of her walls. He knows she is physically vulnerable. He knows she is isolated because in 2 hours, not a single other soul walked through that door. He gathered all this intelligence legally, openly, without raising a single red flag. Or consider the electrician from last autumn. He arrived for a scheduled appointment. Nancy opened the gate to show him the project. He spent days drifting around the property perimeter. He met every security camera to avoid cutting their power. He identified every blind spot. He learned the property's flow, honest labor, a visible presence. Yet he was studying her defenses. Or take the cable guy who upgraded the Wi-Fi. To fix the dead zones, he had to find them. That meant walking every inch of the floor plan, checking signal bars in the master bedroom, the closet, the back office. He saw exactly how the doorbell camera links to the router. He knows the digital handshake that keeps her safe. Technically, it was maintenance. In reality, it was reconnaissance. Then there is the roofer who cleaned the shingles. A neighbor even remarked on how pristine the roof looked compared to the rest of the street. But that cleanliness cost hours of labor high up over several visits. From that vantage point, the entire property is a chessboard. He could see the angle of every lens, the lock type on every window, the layout laid bare beneath him. Days of authorized lurking, perfectly legal, total visibility. Or the cleaning crew that visited bi-weekly. Like clockwork, a recurring character in her narrative. The same individual entering her sanctuary twice a month for years, scrubbing every corner, learning the floorboards by the sound of their creak. They know when she leaves. They know when she sleeps. They know exactly where the valuables are stashed. They know the texture of her life because they have been breathing her air for years. Every bit of this access was invited, paid for, gratefully received. Most tradesmen are decent people trying to make a living. The overwhelming majority build careers on integrity and never cross the line. But access equals data, and data equals power. The man who fixed the AC knows the house better than the police do. The guy who hung the lights knows the shadows. The technician who boosted the signal knows how to cut it. The roofer has the sniper's view. The cleaner has the keys. Any one of these legitimate interactions could have been the dress rehearsal for what happened. We do not suspect them because of their job title. We scrutinize them because knowing times who times held the map is the only way to find times who times followed it. Detectives are now systematically dismantling the list of everyone who ever had a reason to be there. Every invoice, every contractor, every logged visit is under the microscope. They are checking alibis against the timeline, comparing DNA, and tracking phone pings during that fatal window. This isn't guesswork. It is a process of elimination based on hard fact, because whoever spent 41 minutes comfortably walking those halls likely learned the path long before they put on a mask. The lab is still running sequences on the biological evidence. A glove found 2 miles from the scene is visually identical to the one worn by the intruder. The FBI confirms they pulled a DNA sample from the interior, padding an unknown male profile, and it does not belong to anyone in Nancy's inner circle. That genetic sample went straight to CODIS, the FBI's master database housing millions of offender profiles. But new intel suggests we aren't looking at a full genetic fingerprint, it's likely a partial match. A partial profile is a double-edged sword. It has enough data to rule people out, but often lacks the markers needed to ping a definitive name in the system. So, when the standard database hits a wall, they pivot to forensic genetic genealogy. It's the exact same tech that took down the Golden State Killer, the same breakthrough method that cracked the Idaho student murders. They aren't just matching dots, they're building family trees to shrink the suspect pool through ancestry. It is a slower burn than a standard database hit, but when the old school methods dry up, this is the ace in the hole. Detectives are running parallel tracks now. Standard CODIS analysis for a quick hit, and the deep dive genealogy prep in case they need to play the long game. On February 13th, a massive task force, including the FBI, Pima County sheriffs, and local police detained 3 individuals. They swarmed locations roughly 2 miles from Nancy's home. They hauled away a silver Range Rover for the crime lab, but the result was silence. No arrests announced, no charges filed, no names dropped. All 3 people were cut loose within 24 hours. Sheriff Chris Nanos was blunt. Right now, his department has no names on the official suspect list. But read between the lines. That doesn't mean there are no persons of interest. It just means they don't have the handcuffs ready for a public perp walk yet. The tip line is melting down over 23,000 leads, every single one vetted and stacked against the physical evidence. They are begging the public for video, anything within a 2-mile radius of Nancy's place from New Year's Day to early February. They aren't just looking for a car, they are mapping the entire heartbeat of that neighborhood for a solid month. The investigation has shifted gears, moving from a boots-on-the-ground manhunt to quiet, lethal detective work. The FBI packed up the Tucson command post and moved operations to Phoenix, where they have the heavy machinery to crunch the data. We are talking over 10,000 hours of video footage, according to the Bureau. The Pima County Sheriff's Department says they are pulling back the visible patrols to focus on the detective work. Don't mistake that for quitting. It means the case is maturing. They are moving into the silent phase that builds bulletproof prosecutions. The family put $1 million on the table for information leading to Nancy's return. That is a cash offer, according to Savannah. You can even tip anonymously. The FBI threw in another $50,000 on top. Now, picture Nancy's last moment of peace, 9:50 p.m. Saturday night. Her son walks her to the door. Lock turns. Silence. She goes through the motions, brushing teeth, checking the locks. She gets comfortable, feeling completely safe in the home she had owned for decades, drifting off to sleep. She had no idea that the clock was ticking down. 238 minutes later, a shadow would appear at her door. Someone who knew her rhythm. Someone who knew she would be in a deep sleep by 1:47 a.m. This wasn't random. The timeline proves it was calculated. Somewhere in that 41-minute window of hell, Nancy knew. She wasn't confused. Her mind was sharp. She was aware. And that clarity is what makes this gut-wrenching. This wasn't a crime of opportunity against an unaware victim. It was a raid on a woman who understood exactly what was happening. Nancy knew. 84 years old. A grandmother. A church member. A woman who spent 5 decades building a life in Tucson. Gone. Taken by a predator who treated her life like a math problem, timing the abduction with digital precision. The garage door shuts at 9:50. 3 hours and 57 minutes of silence The masked figure appears at 1:47, 41 minutes of terror captured in the digital log. Then, the pacemaker signal stops flat at 2:28 a.m. Every timestamp is a piece of the puzzle. Every digital footprint screams premeditation. This was not an accident. Sheriff Nanos saw it immediately. The timeline proved knowledge. The pattern showed planning. The precision betrayed an insider's understanding. Homicide, not a missing person. The evidence never lied about what this really was. 30 days later, Nancy is still missing. The hunt continues. The labs are grinding through the DNA genealogy. Evidence is being dissected. Tips are being chased. Somewhere out there, someone is holding the secret of those 41 minutes. Her pacemaker recorded every beat of her life until the moment it stopped. The irony is that the technology meant to keep her heart beating is now the only thing pointing to who stopped it. Thanks for watching. Respect the timeline and stay vigilant. We are hunting a ghost who studied Nancy's daily rhythm, waiting for the precise second when she was most vulnerable. This wasn't a stranger breaking in. It was someone with a smiling face and a valid reason to be standing in her hallway. They weaponized that trust, executing a plan that the timeline proves was cold, calculated, and scheduled. The truth is hiding in the microscopic details: the DNA under a fingernail, the credit card receipt in a trash can, the invisible digital footprints of a phone moving in the dark, and the roster of every person who held a key to her door. Nancy Ellen Long Guthrie, born January 27th, 1942, died February 1st, 2026. 84 years of love, 84 years of family, extinguished by a coward who knew exactly when the house would be silent. At 2:28 a.m., her pacemaker sent its last signal, 41 minutes. That is the window between a person entering her home and her heart going silent. The lesson is this: the people we invite into our homes carry knowledge that can become dangerous. Trust carefully. Verify consistently. Stay connected. Keep a written log of every person who enters your home: contractors, cleaners, repair workers. Record the date, the time, and the areas they accessed. Install cloud-connected security cameras at every entry point. Footage uploaded to the cloud in real time cannot be erased by anyone standing at your door. Check in on elderly family members and neighbors every single day, not just on weekends. Isolation is the predator's most powerful tool. If you have information about the Nancy Guthrie case, contact the Pima County Sheriff Tip Line. A reward of over $1 million is available for information leading to her return. Share this story. Post it. Talk about it. Community awareness is the single greatest deterrent to predators who rely on silence and anonymity to operate. Nancy Guthrie spent 50 years building a life in the Catalina Foothills, raising children, attending church, and loving her family with everything she had. Her story is not just a warning, it is a call to protect the people we love, to stay vigilant, and to make sure that no one in our communities ever faces the night alone. Nancy Ellen Long Guthrie, 84 years old, disappeared from her Catalina Foothills home in Tucson on the night of January 31st, 2026. She was not taken by a stranger. She was taken by someone who had studied her life with surgical precision and waited nearly 4 hours to strike. For weeks, possibly months, a predator observed her household. He learned when guests arrived, when they left, and when she would be completely alone. He knew her physical limitations. He knew she could not run, could not fight back, and depended on daily medication to survive. He identified the specific weekend when her daughter Savannah was abroad covering the Winter Olympics thousands of miles away from helping in a crisis. He had been inside that home before. He moved through it for 41 minutes in complete darkness without hesitation because he already knew every corner, every piece of that knowledge had been gathered legally, openly, through the trusted access we give to the people who service our homes. At 9:50 p.m., the garage door shut. Nancy was safe. Her son-in-law had watched her lock the door. The neighborhood was quiet. 3 hours and 57 minutes later, at 1:47 a.m., a masked and armed figure stepped into the frame of her front door camera and disabled it within 44 seconds.